All right, today's gonna be a fun day here at FightCamp 2025 with Dr. Toby Capwell, one of the foremost experts in armor in the world. Next. So Jeff's high forte swordplay. So really excited today to actually have a rare opportunity to work with Dr. Toby Capwell. I know him as formerly curator at the Wallace Collection and now sort of an independent agent, as it were. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about your background and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked as an arms and armor specialist, mostly medieval and Renaissance arms and armor, as a museum curator and author for the last 20 or something years. And for the last couple of years, I've been working just independently, running my own ship, doing the good parts of the job and dodging administrative responsibility, which
I love it.
Tends to find you when you work in
Yes.
museums, and that's not really what I want to do with my time. So
Yeah.
I'm writing books, I'm riding horses, I'm fighting in armor, and doing what the job is really about.
Living the dream, as it were.
Trying to.
Love it, love it. So one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you today, you, in my mind, sort of like live in a slightly different part of the world that I'm used to. So, you know, I love swords. I love researching swords, and I love, you know, trying to figure out how to use swords. Knights obviously did use swords, but used a whole bunch of other things as well. As you mentioned in the lecture that you recently just did, knights also very much involve horses, right? And that's an important component, something that I have very little experience with. So there's definitely sort of like a gulf between my experience and your experience. But where I'm hoping that we have some interconnection here, with swords, as I look at you know, the documented techniques and everything, it seems to me like more and more that mobility is really very important, as you would imagine, to being able to use not just swords, but using swords in the way that the full art intended. And so I'm very curious, you know, in the Lichtenauer tradition, even though they definitely have documented techniques of harness or armored combat, that tends to be sort of much more limited in terms of sort of sword technique. And it's interesting that their longsword technique, when they're not using armor, as far as I can tell, seems to require a lot of mobility, a lot of sort of like these rotational kind of movements. And so when it comes to mobility in armor, can you talk a little bit about, you know, how much mobility could you expect to actually have? And I'll give you a couple of like specific scenarios in a little bit, but just overall, maybe start with, you know, what does good mobility look like for harness? How much variation, and what is maybe the most amount of mobility you might expect?
Well, there's a couple of issues. There's the range of motion that the armor will permit, but then you also have to consider the amount of weight that you're carrying.
Sure, yeah.
So it's not just about mobility,
Right.
It's also about the physical load and the effort your body is having to make to move yourself around.
Right, impact on fatigue. And all that stuff,
yeah, and those two things kind of go together.
Yeah, makes sense.
You can have great mobility, but if your armor's really heavy, it won't matter
Not
too
for
much.
very long.
And similarly, you know, you can have a really light armor that still impedes your mobility to an unacceptable degree if it's not made well or if it's not fitting right.
Right.
But of course, at the root of this, as I always say, mobility and protection are inversely proportional.
Right.
Mobility goes up, protection goes down.
Right.
Protection goes up, mobility goes down. So 100% mobility, you're there in your underpants, as in some fight treatises will show you. That's 100% mobility.
Yes, sure.
And your protection is down to zero, basically.
Yep.
As soon as you introduce any protection at all, it's just a mail shirt, a pair of gauntlets, a helmet, whatever, it's going like this. Your protection is going up, so your mobility is going down. And that's just a fact of life. You cannot have the best of both. You cannot expect to have full plate armor and full mobility. As soon as you add any protection, your mobility is going down. That is the price you pay for the protection. And that's just a reality. It's no good getting an armor and then complaining, well, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
You don't need to do that.
Right.
You know, every armor, every type of armor, every class, every design is finding its own balance between the protection that is absolutely necessary and the mobility that we can work with.
Right.
They are accepting consciously loss of mobility for the sake of protection. That's the cost. It goes up and down. There's no way around that. I mean, it's kind of funny that, I mean, in some cases you find armors in the 15th century trying to violate the universal law. They try to find ways of having the better mobility without sacrificing protection.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of interesting instances where you can violate that law. Besigues being the most important example of that. If you add Besigues onto your shoulder defenses, you massively increase your protection, but you don't affect the mobility.
Right, right.
That's why I love Besigues. I've got Besigues on my armor for that reason.
Clever ways to cheat.
But there aren't that many of those. That's really an exception.
Right.
And this is why it's important as a martial artist to be defining your techniques out of armor and your techniques in armor.
Right.
And you are actively using the armor. The armor isn't just a costume. It's there doing a very immediate practical function that affects your martial arts form. What I mean by that essentially is if you're well acquainted with your equipment, you know the capabilities of your armor, you know how thick the shoulder plates are, you know how much abuse they can take, you know what you can take on the helmet. And then when you're fighting, there's all kinds of attacks you're not going to do anything about.
Right.
You're going to let
Just
it
ignore.
You're going to let it hit you.
Right.
Because your armor is there. While you can put your sword through his head or whatever else you're going to do. And there's plenty of examples where you just, you know, in longsword fighting without armor, there's all kinds of guards.
Right.
You know, to protect your head and to protect your body. None of that applies when you're in armor. So, you know, one of the immediate sacrifices in the range of movement that you can accept in armor is lifting of the arms up here. When you're a martial artist, most of this is about protecting your head or your face in one way or another. You don't need to do that in armor. With your big shoulder plates, protection, that's going to limit your mobility. But you don't need to do that. You have to, the thing about armor is you're not passively wearing it.
Right.
You are actively,
it's actively sort of part of your arsenal.
You're actively operating it like it's a piece of machinery.
Yep.
So when you enter it, you're entering a clearly defined and well understood physical situation. You know, it's you know, when you're driving a forklift, you don't complain about the forklift because you can't get it up to 70 miles an hour.
Right.
It's not what the equipment's for.
Right.
You know, and so in armor, you're in that armor, Italian, German, English, French, whatever. You're in that armor for good reasons, and you're in that armor for a particular fighting environment.
Right.
You know, when you're wearing a great bassinet on the battlefield, it's because you're in the front rank.
Right.
And you are moving frontally straight into your enemies.
Right.
You don't need to be turning your head around.
Right.
You need to be killing what's in front of you.
Right.
And you need to be taking a hell of a lot of abuse while you're doing that. And if you need any kind of situational awareness, you've got your people around you who are going to grab you and turn you and say, okay, go kill that. Right. Bang, bang, bang.
Sure.
Okay. And get him, turn him the other way. You know, it's a group thing.
Right.
You know, if you can't turn your head, it's because the protection is more important and because you don't need to do that in the situation.
Right.
But wearing armor can be really an alien, strange experience for people who are used to jumping about, you know, in the fencing saal with nothing on them.
Right.
You know, but it's a different thing.
Yeah.
It's like you've been riding a bicycle your whole life and now you're in a tank or whatever.
So I think you made a really good point at the lecture just previous about how and it's similar to like when you look at swords, actually, like, you know, the way that a sword looks is not necessarily the way that you expect it to operate. Like two swords that look the same can actually feel very different.
Sure.
So can you maybe repeat a little bit of what you said about, you know, like in English or French or Italian, you know, they're all very sort of different experiences.
Yeah, in the 15th century and later, I mean, you start to see it already in the 14th century, but certainly in the 15th century, and then that develops in the 16th century, is that you get different armor styles and typologies that are different aesthetically, because different parts of Europe have different attitudes to aesthetics, and different people in different parts of Europe have different ideas about what looks good.
Right.
And certain decorative techniques are favored more in one place than another place because of natural resources and the crafts traditions in local areas. There is the aesthetic aspect of this. But it's really important to understand that these different styles, Italian, German, whatever, there's a lot of crossover, but they feel different on your body. The physical experience of wearing an Italian armor optimized for heavy cavalry service is a very, very different experience.
Yeah.
It's like 35 kilos. It's everything proof, and it's designed assuming you're sitting on a horse most of the time. Very different experience from an 18 to 20 kilo, you know, light field armor designed, you know, for use in Germany or whatever. It all looks superficially similar, but
you can only sort of experience from the inside is, I think, what
you can really only appreciate the subtleties of this if you've worn Italian armors and you've worn German armors and you've worn English armors. And this is something that for me has come out of my personal experience of working with all those different styles. And, you know, I go from an English armor to a heavy Italian armor, and I think, holy, geez, this is different.
Yeah.
And you have to, when you have a new armor of a different style, you have to relearn it. You know, it's like qualifying on a different class of vehicle.
Right.
You know? It's like you've been driving hatchbacks your whole life, and now you have to drive a horse trailer or whatever. You can get used to it. It just needs training, and it needs the awareness of what the equipment is for.
Yeah.
If you try and use the equipment for something it's not intended for, you're going to have trouble. I'm not saying you can't fight on foot in an Italian armor. Of course you can. And in some cases, in some situations, it's great. And that asymmetry that's developed for fighting on horseback can be used to your advantage on foot, but it's not where it comes from. And it's not absolutely ideal. You know, we can talk about what will work versus what is ideal.
Right.
And I found fighting competitively, both on foot and on horseback, that if you've got your equipment right and it's really optimized, you have a major advantage competitively. I mean, I started winning more tournaments when I got better gear, and that's where my academic, the luxuries and the advantages that academic study gave me actually advantaged my practical competitive career, because I had access to sources my opponents didn't have. You know, and I knew stuff about armor that they didn't know yet because I hadn't written the books yet.
So basically, hardcore insider knowledge, basically.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. But I'm trying to get that out there, and I'm really trying to make the point that, you know, when you're building an armor for active use in combat, HEMA, jousting, whatever, it's easy to look through books and say, I like that.
Right.
I like this. I want to look like that. But in reality, it doesn't matter so much what you look like. You need the right gear for the right job. And, if you show up with, you show up with a shovel when you need a forklift, you're in trouble.
Right.
And I really want to promote people thinking seriously at first about what are you doing in the armor.
Right.
Do you ride horses sometimes, but mainly fight on foot? Are you fighting entirely on foot in HEMA competitions that are defined in a particular way? What are you doing? Take careful stock of that, and then go back to the historical record and find the armor that was designed at great human cost for that thing.
People died for this.
Lots and lots of people died to drive this evolution.
Right. Is that some of the information that you have in your books, actually, in terms of understanding use cases and making associations on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying in my books to define a whole area of the history of material culture and armor specifically that's just absent from the literature. So I have an academic purpose to the books.
Right.
But when I'm a practitioner first and foremost,
Good.
and all my friends are armored fighters.
Awesome.
I have a few friends who are curators, but most of them are armored fighters. And whenever I'm writing anything, I've always got my pals in the back of my head.
Good.
I'm always thinking of people who are going to be building the gear. What do they need to know? What do they want to see? And that's how I'm thinking about it. So I think it comes out in my work just kind of naturally.
Awesome.
And you know, if people read my books and then there's something they still just aren't getting, most people can work out where to find me. Right. And they do.
So, once again, one of the reasons you are one of the most outstanding people on this subject in the world. So I want to pivot back a little bit to the martial arts aspect of this then, right?
Yeah.
So I get this idea that, okay, we're going to throw away a lot of the technique that's up here to protect the head because it's really not necessary anymore.
Right.
When I think about some of the techniques I've seen in Paul Sector Meyer, which I have a lot of familiarity with, but like in the German tradition in general, there's still a fair amount of, say, grappling technique that is relevant, right? So not just grappling technique in terms of throws without weapons, but also with weapons. So there's certain things like, for instance, Schildhau with the German longsword. Like there are things where you sort of hook the neck with the sword or with a poleaxe or whatever, right? And so like there are these sort of like rowing sort of mechanics, which if you think about it, eventually sort of blend into sort of almost moulinet kind of motions. So back to the mobility thing, harness was sufficiently mobile for that kind of motion from your experience?
Sometimes, not all the time.
Not always?
It depends what sword gauntlets you're wearing.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at late 15th century German gauntlets, they have amazing wrist, metacarpal, and finger articulation. Amazing. I mean, the plates their flexibility far exceeds the anatomy's capabilities.
Got it. So it's not it's
so
not a limiting factor. Okay.
If you're wearing that.
Right.
If you're wearing Italian gauntlets with no wrist articulation,
much more locked in.
Forget it.
Okay.
But
it is possible. It is possible.
Oh, sure, it's possible.
Got it. Okay.
To an extent, but anytime you're putting metal plates there, you have to deal with some restriction of some kind. But the German anatomical engineering is pretty amazing.
Okay.
I wear German armor in part because of that. Not only because of that, but you know,
that's one of the
access to that amazing articulation is handy. At times, so to speak. But don't forget also that there's more crossover. Like in some armored combat, in some sporting or formal courtly armored combat, you still see evidence of the use of Blossfechten techniques in armor.
Okay. Fantastic.
Because in a display situation, you want to be able to show your literacy in those techniques.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you want to be safe.
Right. And by the way,
so for example, in the Emperor Maximilian's unpublished tournament book, the Friedal manuscript, you see a lot of unarmored longsword technique that they're performing in armor.
So how do you know that is unarmored technique in armor as opposed to this is also considered armored technique?
Because they've got their arms up here and they're cutting each other.
I see. Okay.
You don't cut an armored opponent.
Right. Gotcha.
Unless you have some weird courtly reason to do that.
Right.
I mean, cutting someone in full plate armor with a sword will get you precisely nowhere.
Except for demonstration purposes.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha.
To show your technique, but if you consciously need to defeat the person and you need to kill them, cutting with the edge of a sword is going to do nothing.
Right. So that explains, this was one of the scenarios I kind of wanted to ask about. Similarly, obviously you can walk in armor. One of the things that I think I'm starting to see more evidence of is also kind of walking sideways, where you actually sort of pass your feet sort of like triangling.
Yeah.
You know, in front and behind. I've heard the opinion that like in armor, that's going to be a problem. And I can imagine, you know, there are certain kinds of armor where it could be a problem, but in terms of maximum mobility, is it possible to sort of cross your feet as you're moving?
I can cross my feet.
Okay, great.
If
Thank you.
If your leg armor is well fitted, I don't see
Okay.
any reason why you shouldn't be able to cross your feet. If you can't cross your feet, then I think it's probably an armor deficiency.
Yeah. Okay.
But if your armor, the thing is, you can't draw historical conclusions from the use of equipment that is different than what they were wearing in the 15th century.
Sure, absolutely.
If it's too dissimilar and too modern in one way or another, then you're not learning anything.
Right.
You have to replicate the same conditions if you want your historians' conclusions to be valid.
Right.
That's why I've spent, far too much money, time, and effort on getting armor that is the same as the real thing.
I'm sorry.
Because I won't learn anything otherwise.
Absolutely. So I'm sorry, how many different suits of armor have you said? You said like 7 different
There's
suits?
been 7, but each of my armors has had at least 4 and usually 5 iterations. So it depends. It's like if you change the handlebars of a bicycle, is it the same bicycle?
No, right.
It's a metaphysics thing.
So it's really far more than 7 different sorts of...
But depending on how you think about armor, it could be far more than 7.
Yes. That is very good context. Very good context and very enviable.
I try not to think about it too much.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that has been a really great tour of like armored combat and sort of the interconnection with the unarmored combat. Another angle coming from the unarmored Blossfechten kind of world, if we think about the German Fechtschule, right? When we're talking about things, sort of competitions where they're actually protected very little, and we're expected to actually be able to leave sort of red marks on people's heads and that sort of thing. Do we have any data on how much protection they may have been wearing or not? So for instance, like when you look at depictions of this, people are wearing sort of like clothes that you would expect them to be wearing, at least outwardly, but do we have any sense of like if there was any sort of padding that they might have been wearing when they're actually practicing? Or for instance, with like hand protection, could they perhaps have been, with some mail on the inside, or like, do we have any sense from a documentation perspective? Like
there's a lot more evidence of that kind of thing in the 16th century.
So 1500s.
Then you've got mail-faced gloves, and you've got fencing doublets, and you've got blunts on the swords. You get all of that in the 16th century. And in the 15th century, there are fencing school long swords. Those are well known. But with all of this training equipment, you very quickly run up against the essential problem of safety in training, which is that if you make it safe, it bears no resemblance to the real world exercise that you are training for. Part of winning a real fight when your life is on the line is knowing what that feels like mentally and being comfortable in that environment and accepting the risks and knowing where the risks are and having the experience to manage it mentally as well as physically. So I think in the 15th century, there was a really strong awareness of that. And they were very much aware that if we make this too safe, it's of no value. If you've ever done any fencing with sharp blades, I really strongly recommend this. Be careful, obviously, but the way sharp blades play on each other and the kind of blade interactions that occur, totally different than what you get with blunt swords or, dare I say, nylon or wood or anything else.
Absolutely,
there's a lot of techniques that just don't make sense unless those are sharp, serious blades. And if you are training to defend your life, you need to spend time in that environment. And that just goes with the territory. I mean, you see that with the history of tournaments too. I mean, when you're a knight fighting on horseback and you've got to train to use the couched lance, to kill other armored knights on horseback, there's really no training except doing it. And how do you do this and train for it without getting everybody killed?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sure that modern militaries, you know, wrestle with these same problems. You put your young soldiers out with your laser paintball guns or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing, and there's no training for war except war.
Right.
So we wrestle with this, and modern practitioners, they just have to make their own mind up about the level of safety or the level of acceptable danger for their own purposes.
Yeah, that makes good sense. So I do want to kind of wrap up. So I think it's been super helpful to look at this from a world that I don't get to explore nearly as much and would like to. So for someone like myself who has come from not zero experience with harness and armor, but actually bad experience with armor that has not fit me very well and has actually sort of put me off to kind of getting involved in it. Like, what's a good way of sort of thinking, getting into that world where I can kind of sort of slowly build myself up, think about the right use cases, right? But once you have an idea of like what it is you want to use it for, how do you go about approaching, okay, I start building with maybe part of the harness or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because, you know, armor is like wine. You get what you pay for. Right. And generally, if you pay more money, you've got better quality coming as a natural effect of that.
Yeah.
And the experience of wearing you know, inexpensive armor that probably doesn't bear very much resemblance to the real thing.
Yeah.
That kind of experience can often be worse than no experience.
Right.
If you're interested in the historical experience.
Yeah.
If you're doing your own modern sport bohord thing or whatever, and it's its own thing in its own conditions, fine.
Right. Good enough. Yeah.
It's not about history. It's about a modern thing. That's fine. But if you're interested in the real human experience in the past, you have to get experience with better gear. And it has to fit you. It's not only got to be good quality, but good quality equipment that doesn't fit you isn't going to tell you very much either.
So the bespoke aspect is pretty critical.
But, you know, there are more seminars going on in armored fighting, harnischfechten. We're running them in the UK now. We're running them in Germany. There's some going on in America too. It's just very spread out and harder to get to the groups that have, you know, good gear.
I think
but you just, it's as with all of these things, you got to find the group of people who are on your wavelength, and who are doing things for the same reasons you're doing them. And you know, there are people on your wavelength, but in armor. They're out there. You just got to go find them.
Yeah. Do you think it would be fair maybe to close and say, expect it to be a journey? Like, you know, you're going to start and, you know, you want to get to a certain place, but it's important to expect that you're going to learn things and make adjustments and kind of, you know, you know, both from a metaphorical, but also from a physical, you know, if you're going to build a suit of armor, that you're going to start somewhere and you're going to sort of like continue to evolve it effectively.
It's all about the journey. The journey is everything. The destination doesn't matter at all. That's one thing I've learned in the last 30 years, because I've spent, you know, God knows how many thousands of dollars and years of my life developing an armor, doing all the research, building it, flying to the armorers to do fittings and everything else, get it, and then you wear it, you have to tweak it, you have to change it, you have to adjust it. And when it's perfect, I lose interest and I want a different journey. When you arrive, you gotta, I mean, that's everything. That's it.
I feel like I've heard the phrase perfection is boring.
So off you go.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, I think that's a good way to end it. So thank you very much, Toby.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Pleasure. All right, next video, guys.